Welcome to Growing Up with AI, where I speak to parents working on AI about how they think about this technology in the context of their kids. Today I'm joined by Nicole Büttner, the visionary founder and CEO of Merantix Momentum. Nicole shares how her conversations about AI with companies have shifted from a focus on technical performance to governance and societal impact. She talks about the challenges and opportunities for Europe in building a sovereign tech stack and the importance of fostering a culture of independent thought and innovation in the next generation. Nicole, welcome to Growing Up with AI.
Thanks, Gabriel, for the invitation.
When your kids ask you, Mama, what do you do for work? What do you tell them?
Yeah, funny. I had to hold a talk once and I tried to explain AI by basically I'm putting brains into robots. That really flew well. And I would say now I extend it a little bit because they play a lot with Lego. And we have all these nice Lego blocks that we can build beautiful stuff with. And AI is one of these Lego blocks. And we want to build very cool stuff with. And hopefully mom can help us understand how to build stuff fast and good. So we can actually build the stuff and play with stuff we like and not just play with stuff other people built. Yeah, so that's essentially what I would tell them.
Very nice. You've been in the AI space for a long time, way before the current hype of AI. Has your definition of what AI means changed over that time?
I mean, to be honest, if I look at sort of pitches, right, that we did 6 years ago, we were already talking about like general purpose technology and it's the new electricity and it's like fire and so on. There are even a few really interesting memes in our Slack channels on this stuff. But I would say it has changed insofar that I would say I would go from more what is narrow AI to more general, right? 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it felt more narrow. Chess engines, recommendation systems. Today, with large scale models, AI is moving closer to universal problem-solving tool. I would say it's gone more from technical to societal. I think we're sort of thinking more about, we're not thinking about model performance so much anymore. It is obviously important accuracy, speed, optimization. But I would say I equally think about adoption, governance, trust, competitiveness, right? All these topics that are not merely technical, but kind of economical and societal ones. And yeah, also it feels less researchy and more like we're building infrastructure for tomorrow, right? It feels less like we're hidden away somewhere in research labs, but more, okay, this is like the plumbing and the infrastructure we're kind of building for today and for tomorrow. That has
And
changed.
so have the conversations that you have with your clients and with the boards of your clients changed quite a lot as well than during that time?
Absolutely. So we've moved, I would say, looking at can we actually do this with AI? Unknown unknowns in certain domains, let's say medical diagnostics, can we recognize certain skin cancer patterns or whatever? Now it's pretty clear we can do it, and it's a function of, it's like more known unknowns. How pretty or ugly is the data set? How precise and accurate does the output has to be? But I would say that has moved quite a bit, and it's shifting much more to how do we actually get this into adoption? How do we get people to use it, to trust it, to share data with it, to change workflows? So it has also shifted quite from this technical to more governance, living with AI and all that stuff.
So has that also changed who you speak to?
I guess a little bit, yeah. I mean, I would say we're always looking at all sorts of use cases. So we've spoken already to people, business owners, doctors, chemists, and all sorts of different profiles. But for sure, we're moving more away from the experts we need for a certain use case to get all the, let's say, knowledge about the subject matter, to people who have to implement things at scale, people who understand user adoption and human behavior, to the governance people, the ethics people in organizations, to representatives of employees, right? More committees and governance bodies. And I think that's a good sign because it just means we're actually building technology that's supposed to be used at scale. And to do that, yeah, you need a bit of governance, that's for sure.
I get the feeling at the beginning when generative AI came around, there was a lot of conversation around efficiencies. That was probably a conversation with the finance departments or the IT departments. Now I think there's more about this top line growth side of things, which is probably more of a question for the CEO, because it tends to be more of a question around like, what is our moat going to be in this new world? How do we release the value? And it's actually quite difficult to make that shift inside of the organization if you already have a pattern of who's responsible for something. So has that shift happened across with the clients that you work with, or is it more that now newer clients end up having different conversations with you?
I mean, I would say, if you really think about AI as a new factor changing and shifting your whole sector, the way we potentially interact with clients and so on, it's quite a seismic shift. And so I think it's just normal that we don't observe that this has dramatically changed all organization structures yet. I think we see still quite a lot of friction because there is fear, there is sometimes a lack of experience with the technology, there is a lack of best practices for some areas, and so no, like I would say the majority of organizations I speak to has not yet completely undergone transformation, and they're ready, and it's all in place to deploy. I'd say most of them have an awareness. They understand the urgency. A lot of them are experimenting. Some of them have use cases rolled out, and they're all getting ready. They all feel they have to do more and they have to move faster.
And are there any industries that you feel are ahead of others?
I mean, I feel quite an area of excitement, I would say, is the whole biotech, tech bio space. I feel like we do a lot of things around discovering new materials, discovering medications, and so on. If you look at the pharmaceutical space, those are essentially already data companies from day one because they focus on generating a lot of data, and then they need the data to validate a product, but it's entirely data focused, I would say. I guess, some of the structures are still, a bit archaic and so on, but I would say there is a lot of potential there, and a lot of things that we see moving there. Then, of course, you have the more digitized business models, right, where you're already in digital data modes. Those are more prone, right? Like if you look at consumer sectors and so on, that's quite easy. And a big lag wherever there is heavy infrastructure investment involved, like real estate, for example, is far behind just because there's so much legacy infrastructure. It's hard to digitize.
And you're not just running your own company, you're also an advisor and an investor into technology in Europe in general. How do you see the European tech ecosystem compared to what's happening in the US and in China, in particular with regards to AI at the moment?
I'm very optimistic and I'm quite excited as an investor. I think this is a beautiful place to live. And I think ultimately, if you can tap into basically worldwide talent, which you can now, there is a lot of really good talent in Europe, and you can attract a lot of really good talent to come to Europe. There is a lot of capital here. There are very interesting markets here. And I think in a world where you can basically operate, remotely completely, it's still worth being close to your clients when you're building products. So you want to be close to those markets that you're developing for. We have a bunch of interesting challenges here and transformations to solve against. So I think it's a pretty interesting space. Then there are a few disadvantages. There is a lot of focus on the challenges. There's a lot of focus on regulation. But in itself, right, there are a lot of industries that are very interesting that need to be transformed. So a lot of new product companies will be born out of this. A lot of really interesting expert knowledge in those companies and sectors to build around. So I'm pretty excited, to be honest. I also think it's time to sort of step up the game a bit more. I mean, I still think we also need to step up the game a bit more, but I'm very, very optimistic and also very excited about people coming here, building here, the way they're thinking about building companies of substance. I really like that way of operating.
Yeah, I feel for a long time, Europe was perceived as this museum of the world where a lot of great ideas happened hundreds of years ago, and now people came to visit and then go away again. Well, actually, I agree with you. It's like one of the best places to live at the moment. And so is it just that we're lacking a bit of swagger and that we're lacking a bit of that posture and we're not proud enough in what we have? Or do you feel like actually some of it is so substantive around that it really needs more reform before we can unleash some more of that capability and the innovation here?
I mean, I think it's a bit of both. I think we're really bad at storytelling, I think. So we're not really good at like the big marketing show when you think about a US president unveiling an investment package and, getting all the pictures and the whole media show, right? I think if you ask today what has happened there, you might also be a bit disillusioned, and you might see it's not everything as shiny as it looked day one, but it was really good, aspirational, ambitious, big, bold storytelling. And that's something we still need to learn, I feel. We really need to get that better because it's also something investors want to hear. It's also something people emotionally connect to, right? I mean, beyond investors, also just people, everyday people. If I tell a really good story, people are like, I want to be part of this. I want us to be really good at this and so on. So I think that's missing, broadly speaking. And I think technology would give us such good storylines and also implementation paths to solve so many of our challenges. I think there could be way more buy-in than we have. And then on the other hand, I mean, we can look at, like, let's say, how easy is it to get B2B clients in Europe versus the US? I would say it takes longer than in the US. How much investment do companies do into R&D and technology in Europe versus the US? Half as much if you measure it on GDP comparables. So there are still some structural things that we also need to get right to fully fuel the story and really get up to speed. Mix of both.
And do you feel now is the time for Europe to build more of its own tech infrastructure?
Yes, I think so. The question of sovereignty, right, is, I don't think of it as isolationism. I don't think like that at all. You know, you and I, we've had very international lives and we've lived in different places in the world, and we totally see, and very specifically in the domain of AI, that collaboration is really important. And we see that in a lot of major papers that have really brought the space forward, etc., that they're based on collaboration. But yes, I think in a world where we see this as an important resource, and the way language models, for example, are built, yeah, there is what you think is baked into them, especially when you now look at conversational AI models and so on. Then by building the technology, you're shaping the way people look at things and the way people access knowledge. And that's quite a powerful tool. And it would be nice if we could all use the same thing and if we all were on the same page. But I think we will still need a few more decades or centuries to get there. And in the meantime, yes, I think it's smart to have chip infrastructure. I think it's smart to also think about strategic AI assets like LLMs or other things, and think, how can we get there? That doesn't mean I think the state should build all of this stuff or would be good at doing it. But I think, yes, Europe would be in better shape if we had more of those assets in Europe and if we built them here successfully.
Recent cloud provider expos they were running, they emphasized quite a lot of that sovereign cloud in Europe, even though they're all American companies. So clearly they're getting quite a lot of that from their customers as well. So that seems like there is definitely a demand for something like a sovereign cloud, a sovereign European tech stack. Do you feel we have the capabilities and the financial strength to be able to build something like this up? Because the investment amounts that the big American scalers are putting into this at the moment, I think it's like 350 billion a year that they're putting into infrastructure by itself. Significant numbers.
Yeah, I think there was a headline, just I think Amazon alone is putting in twice or thrice as much as the German defense budget as a whole, just into their AI research. So those are indeed mind-boggling numbers. But I also believe we need to just basically leverage private capital better. So obviously, government capital, state capital won't be able to match those numbers, but I think you can encourage investment here by private companies. You need to obviously leverage public money with private investment and kind of build a lot of incentives for people to build things here. And I think if you do that, then you can actually also start building this virtuous cycle of having infrastructure, of people and customers paying for this infrastructure, companies building profit around it, and then being able to reinvest those profits into startups or other lines of businesses or applications, etc.
It's interesting. I think the UK spends 70 billion or something along those lines on third-party software and, licenses and stuff like that. It feels like other countries are probably spending similar amounts across Europe. So it still feels like there's a vast amount of cash that could be repurposed towards more of a European software ecosystem. Not saying that all of that goes to the American ecosystem, but probably a large proportion of it will go to the big players.
Yeah, and then we have to build a good product. I mean, at the end, right, I don't think sovereignty should be like, oh, let's oblige people to buy, the German or the UK product. I think at the end, the products need to be convincing.
Yeah.
And if people place importance on features like sovereignty, like the data is hosted within a European company and they are completely subject to European legislation, then, that's part of a feature. But all the other stuff still has to be there. And I mean, if we look at hyperscaler business models specifically, I think there we just see it's going to be quite difficult. And we see initiatives like Eurostack initiative because right from a hyperscaler, you can get the whole package from just data centers and cloud and managed cloud to all the applications. You get it all in one bundle. And in Europe, if you wanted to procure the same by just European players, it would be a whole spaghetti bowl of services you would have to plug together. It'd probably be highly inconvenient. And to bridge that gap, right, that will take considerable effort.
I think Copenhagen recently decided to ditch the Microsoft stack and went towards open source Linux. So do you see that maybe that's more of an option, that actually Europe heavily leans into open source and sets up regulation to prioritize open source?
Why not? I mean, if that's something we want to do, and if that's something we want to prioritize, and then that means we want to also attract and train talent in Europe on these topics. And And that could be a viable strategy to say, okay, that's the way we want to operate, especially when we look at government applications. We think that makes sense because that's just philosophically something we want to support. And I think there are good arguments to make to go this way for governments. Then, yeah, why not do that and say we're prioritizing this, and maybe those models have different, or those software stacks have different types of constraints placed in them than others. I mean, that would be a way of doing regulation in a different way than today.
I think we kind of almost inadvertently spoken about values a couple of times here, right? Like values of LLM system, values of building software. It definitely feels to me that alone, having a system that's closer aligned to the European values, which might or might not be more divergent from some of our partners at the moment, becomes more important if more and more of the world is driven by AI systems and technology on top of it.
Yeah, and I think the value debate is a really difficult one, because I think we would still say, oh, there is something like European values. Yet if we look into specific policies or behaviors, even of European countries, they might be vastly different, right? If we look at defense or energy policy, even just between Germany and France, it's quite opposing, or, I'm not sure how we could reconcile these things. Then again, we have joint European laws and ideas, so there might be a common nucleus. I still think this debate is really important on thinking, what are actually those things we want from technology? This discourse is not happening enough. I don't think at national level, and probably not at European level. It's a lot about what we don't want or what we're afraid of, but the positive North Star narrative of this is what we want to achieve with this in Germany, in the European Union, in Europe as a whole, is lacking. And I think it's totally necessary, because this is ultimately a societal debate, what we want from technology.
And do you feel that's also why our regulation is quite heavily focused on protecting us from downsides rather than making sure that it enables certain upsides?
Yeah, I think it's because, that's this alignment problem that we're all talking about so much. And sort of, I think, like, getting technology to do what we want as humans, I think I'm quite confident we can solve that, right? But actually aligning different humans and different societies and different countries on what is it we actually want from technology, I think it's just a trickier, more complex conversation. And so it's easier to look at what are we afraid of than to look at what is it in a positive sense that we all have in common and we all want. That's my intuition on this. But it's still an important conversation. We can't shy away from it. We'll have to have it. And I would encourage everybody to start having it where they are.
In a way, though, that kind of brings one of the big benefits of the European area, right? Because to be successful in Europe, you have to be multi-language from the beginning. You have to find a way of actually aligning all of these different values. So that should make it much easier down the line to go into other countries, because then it's just one more language, just one more set of values, and you've already figured out how you scale across that. So why are we struggling so much around building big international businesses, given that from the start you have to think much more internationally than if you were starting in the US, say?
Yeah, that's true. And at the same time, I think that's not how we've seen companies scale, right? I think it's completely right what you're saying. But then usually, especially like VC-funded firms, they then say, okay, we do 1 or 2 European markets, maybe 3, and then we directly go to the US market, just because it's a bigger homogenous market. It doesn't have these complexities, right? And so on. So what you could see as sort of by design an advantage, because you'd have to think about it often, is, I would say, not really executed then. And we could argue, is it an advantage? I think, like, the social security system in all 27 states is different. Like, all these, now we're talking about the 28th regimes to kind of have one harbor, so companies can kind of reduce complexity and just say, okay, I'm just going to cohere to this, and that will potentially then solve things, in different financial aspects and so forth. So yeah, the complexity is beautiful. I think, we all value it, but it's also a bit tricky when you're building a company. At the same time, right, American companies have come to Europe and scaled very successfully across all the European countries. So it can be done.
And I think also kind of people tend to forget that the US is not as homogeneous in many places, right? You can't import alcohol across state lines. There's different tax regimes in every different state and a whole bunch of other differences. And data protection is different in California to the rest of the states, for example.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's not as straightforward. You now have also taken on a political role as Director General of the Liberal Party in Germany. What role does politics have to play here in order to bring that debate forward?
I think one thing is understand technology better as the political class, or like the whole political system. One thing is already thinking about how can technology be used in the state, and regarding like in the context of citizens. I think that's one thing. So I think starting adopting AI is kind of part of the process to understand how it works, to understand limitations, to understand all the nitty-gritty that we're understanding as we're building stuff, and then realize, oh, that doesn't work. Damn, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's rethink this differently, right? I think that's one part of it already. I think we need to, think about how can we be in the driver's seat, and how can we understand the resources and the framework it will take to make this technology successful in Europe, and to stay somewhat architects in this process, and not to be, as you described it earlier on, kind of the museum of the world, and people come here to kind of have a look at beautiful European cities, but nobody's interested in what's going on technologically. So I think we need to understand that better. And, that means probably we need to understand what startups need, because a lot of the companies that are successful in this domain are quite young companies, globally speaking. So that would be one thing. What do we need to make startups big and prosperous in Europe? And there's a lot of stuff, capital markets, using technology, right? Some certain funding segments and growth capital, etc. I'm an economist by training, okay? And in economics, you have something like positive and negative externalities. So if you pollute, for example, with your car, a negative externality would be all the CO2 you produce and all the other junk. And there could be taxation to hold you accountable for this externality. But this is just a mechanism to think about. If I think about technology, there are also, I'd say, very positive and probably also some negative externalities. And I think we need to understand better how to use technology in those segments where we really need it so desperately. So my main example would be, everybody's using social media, everybody's using technology, and it's doing what it's doing to our societies, for better or for worse, right? It's like, I don't think everything is positive what we see, but that's the way the world goes. So that we're having anyway. Those externalities are coming our way. But the positive stuff, so to actually have healthcare more personalized, faster, more affordable, that's something we make incredibly difficult.
Mm.
And we need to get that balance right, because it can't be that it's easy to import all the junk that comes with tech, right? Like everything comes with something that's not perfect. But it takes us decades to get healthcare right, to get education right, and all those things. That's out of whack. And then we kind of have the feeling we're living in different decades at the same time. Living like in the 1960s in the healthcare system, but if I do e-commerce shopping, I'm like in 2045. That's, I think, a bit weird.
Do you feel that any European country or any other country has actually figured out how to digitize a lot of that offer?
I mean, if you look at something like Israel, like a country like Israel, they, for example, have quite a digitized healthcare system with a lot of prevention. All your healthcare data is in one app. Now, everybody will say about data protection, but essentially you get reminders for all your important checkups. You have, you can send prescriptions. Everything is handled in one application. You can even send the sick note of your child directly to the teacher, like no tampering or anything possible. I would say that's much more integrated than what I see, for example, in Germany, where I essentially have to give it the same data if I change a room in a hospital, because they can't share it between the front desk reception and the emergency room and the specific doctor, or something crazy like that.
And I think Estonia is also often said as a country that does it quite well. Sweden is highly digitized. I wonder though whether they're always relatively small countries, right? They probably all have a tiny proportion of the German population. Do you think there's like a scaling thing there around it's just really difficult to do this in a larger country and to effectively run that program? Or is there something beyond that as well?
Sure. I mean, I know this is always the argument, but at the same time, when I talk to my peers in tech, they're just like, well, then, we just plug in a few more compute units and it should be able to handle larger volumes.
Yeah, maybe less the technological scaling than what you mentioned earlier, right? Like a lot of your conversations now have moved away from technology much more to the change management and more people with more opinions, with more to lose, pushing back.
So there is for sure like a systemic complexity. At the same time, when you think of devices or things that we all, like none of us used to use 10 years ago and all of us use today, there is also, I feel, something true about just creating very good products, software products or hardware products that people can just use intuitively. I mean, my 80-year-old mother, uses a lot of nice smartphones or smart tablets very intuitively. She never read a manual and so on. So I think it's an excuse also, to be honest. Like, let's try, and then if we don't manage then let's learn. But let's not take it as an excuse not to do it.
Kind of the UK tried for a long time to bring all the health records together. It made external consultancies a lot of money, but didn't really get us anywhere. And I wonder where there's just so many stories across all of the countries where you as a minister just don't want to be the other person who screws this up again and loses a lot of money on behalf of the tax holder. Somehow those smaller countries maybe started smaller, it was less politicized when they made those changes. Maybe they had more of a burning platform to go after.
Yeah, true. And at the same time, I don't think we all fondly remember the pandemic, but during the pandemic, you could also see that some of these topics were possible to address, even in a country like Germany. We all of a sudden had something like a digital vaccination status, right? And Corona warning app and those things. So there are elements that were kind of possible. And where did that go?
Yeah, and I think kind of the Corona app in Germany was developed by kind of not by the state, but not by the private sector either, right? It was actually quite an interesting way of bringing it together. It seems to have brought the capabilities and the trust from the right pieces.
Exactly, but it wasn't continued. It's not like we said, oh, there's something that works, let's build on it. I don't know what happened to this app. I think it's like gone.
Yeah, I think the funding was cut a couple of years ago and they stopped developing.
Exactly.
You have so many different roles. You're the CEO of a company, you're an investor, you do a lot of talking. Now you've picked up a political role. You also have 2 young children. How do you manage to balance all of that?
For me, it's all part of the same thing I'm trying to do. So I don't really see all these roles as conflicting, to be honest. I think there are different parts that are coming together on the mission, the very strong mission, I feel, so to really create technology that is serving us as society, that we are architects of, and that enable us to sort of shape the future we want to live in, which is ultimately a very human process. What do we want to do? And technology is a tool for me on the way there, a very important and powerful tool, but just a tool. What we're trying to do as parents is probably trying to understand how can we help, our kids be resilient, be mentally strong, be who they want to be out there in the world and understand what's going on and, have some fun and be happy in the time. And, everybody, like every company is trying to fulfill their mission. And, ultimately it's at a different scale in different contexts, a similar thing. How do we understand the changing world around us? How do we respond to it? And the same applies to countries and states that, we also need to understand how do we position economy. How do we understand the trends? How do we venture outside of the comfort zone? And, ultimately to get more knowledge, to get to the next line of progress and so on. And that's, individual, but also enterprise and also state. It's, I would say, very much tied together. And I just enjoy doing that. And I really want us to be successful at this as Europe. And so all these hats kind of fit in. For me, it all makes very much sense.
So is there any conversations that you've had where you're like, oh, actually, that gives me some ideas around how to maybe treat technology differently at home?
I think the sense of like what you actually want to achieve. Like, for example, when we talk about AI ethics in companies and governance structures, right? It's a lot about you can't get it all right. Like ethics is so complex. You kind of need to choose what is really important to you and then design structures. And then, you discover, oh, there's other stuff going wrong. And you kind of decide, do you want to fix that or not? Can you? And right, are there conflicting goals, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that process of kind of knowing who you are and what's important to you and what you're trying to achieve out there, that's already pretty deep and it's pretty complex just for one person and then getting everybody in an organization on board and so on. So I feel that's really at the core of it, right? And also having this, I think, talking to clients sometimes, that audacity and to have that confidence and that kind of safe, confident zone in yourself to say, okay, it might go wrong, but I'll figure that out. I think that's something I'd really like to instill in my children. When I think of it, because I just see people are struggling. They're like, so what you said before, right? Then people are so afraid to mess up again. Then you just don't move anymore. That's not how we progress as human species. That's not the history of evolution over the last 2 billion years.
I've been in the AI and data space for 15 years, but I definitely feel about this very differently now over the last 2-3 years around just the extent of how this might be disruptive or transformational compared to previous times in data, both with the focus on my kids, but also with the focus on the organization that I work for and their place within the marketplace. And I can imagine you have so much visibility, as you mentioned, right? You're zooming in and out, and you're probably seeing similar questions at almost like at every fractal of how much you zoomed in, right? Like, what makes me successful? I can imagine as a country, as a company, as an individual. So are there kind of specific big things that you say, okay, this is the thing that I hear over and over again, no matter which level I am having those conversations at?
People are afraid being embarrassed socially. Right? And this can start with, I don't know, doing pee in your pants or right, messing up a big project on government level. And I think they're afraid to die, right? If I look at those social pressures, I think that's already quite interesting to keep that independence and think about, is this right? I mean, is everybody doing it because it's a smart thing? Or is there another alternate version of this? And I need to have independence of thought and come to my independent conclusion at least. And that might be what everybody else is doing, or it might not be that. I used to work in hedge funds, and I saw for some long short, I would go to New York and I would visit, 20 funds in 1 week, and I looked at their portfolios. And at the end of the week, I had the feeling everybody was kind of almost converging to a very similar portfolio. If I looked at fund of hedge fund level, they were kind of converging to very similar types of portfolios. So that true diversifying effect was almost, I don't want to say lost, I don't want to bash the hedge fund industry now, but I would say it went down considerably. Also, by the way, with governance coming in. So there were a lot of governance checklists that you had. So no position was supposed to be bigger than 5%. You had to cut a position if it had more than 10% loss, right? So if you aggregate rules like this on a very rules-based, non-reflective way, then you almost have to end up with very similar portfolios in the end. And so I think about this for many areas of life, kind of, if I take this as a metaphor, a very specific story, you can think about AI ethics. If you replace thinking and independent thought process just with checking lists and working down, drop-down menus, that's usually how financial crises happen, or how also bubbles happen, and everybody's kind of in a herd mechanism running the same direction. So I think instilling that more and thinking more independently about what we need to do and having that audacity, I think, is like a major theme. And that fear is, I think, probably in all of us, to kind of how far can you venture out of that and really do something that's new, because I think it can go wrong, obviously, and we're embarrassed all the time, but also all sorts of stuff. But I think also a lot of the great things we achieved as humans, as organizations, as countries, have kind of come from stepping out of what would be groupthink now, or what everybody else would do, and have led to, stuff like the German reunification or other historic events that were also very good outcomes.
This is really interesting to bring this back to the conversation we were having earlier around the US versus European culture. Because European culture for a long time was very much about this, right? Like the Renaissance is a great example of everyone trying to step out of the existing ideas and doing something purely because they were interested, kind of ignoring what people around them were saying. And arguably, Europe has the social safety nets to allow you to make many more mistakes, right? You're not suddenly going to be unable to support your kids, or you're going to not be able to afford your medical bills if your idea goes wrong or someone no longer agrees with you. Do you have an idea of what made us lose some of that more outspokenness or more brave thinking that you're referring to there?
There might be different factors, right? Some of it might be, do you feel the necessity? There's always a balance between social net and also a bit necessity to hustle. If you're intrinsically motivated, or if you have a necessity. We see, for example, also a lot of migrants make for excellent founders because they go from one country where they're potentially very established to another one, and they need to kind of rebuild everything. And a lot of times you see statistically significant sort of effects and see, okay, they need to hustle again because they're in a new country. And I think where that completely gets lost, where you can get too complacent, I think that balance in some European countries, I would say also, in Europe, in Germany or something, I think it's a bit out of whack. And then I think, I think, just the freedom, also the mental freedom to be able to make mistakes and to express thought quite freely. I mean, for me, one of the biggest ways of containing your own freedom is if you're already not expressing something because you're afraid of what other people might say or think. I think that's the worst thing. I think that's also how totalitarian regimes work, that they basically don't even have to control you all the time. They just, you kind of auto-redact. I'm not saying that that's where Europe is right now, but we definitely should preserve sort of that this intellectual curiosity and really thinking things through from different angles. I think that's really important for us to be good in this process of developing new ideas and kind of new breakthroughs.
And so how do you instill that rebel nature in your kids? You're busy. I can imagine you don't want to have to argue with your kids every single time around that they need to get dressed and get ready and stuff like that. By
Yeah.
the way, actually, them arguing with you is exactly what you're looking for in some shape or form, right? In their own little world.
You never know whether you're supposed to be proud of your child kind of talking back to you, because you're like, oh, own point of view, and expressing it and quite clever and thinking about things logically, or like, oh no, this is going to cost me a lot of time arguing about stuff now. It was way easier when I could just say, this is the truth, take it. So yeah, I think it's the same as everywhere else, right? It's just complex. You have to then take the time to do it. If you want to see it in people around you, you need to also tolerate it. It's not a one-way street, but it's a lot of fun. So I think once read a good book, and it basically thought about making mistakes and decisions. So trying to basically get your kids to be able to take their own decisions and make a lot of mistakes, kind of, and understanding was this a good or bad decision, and sort of almost setting a KPI and like, how many mistakes have they made today? Non-fatal mistakes, right? In a kind of control zone. And that would almost be KPI. If you're giving them enough space to make mistakes, then their decision-making process, right, kind of gets refined, and that probably makes them stronger for bigger decisions in the future, where there's also unknown stuff coming their way. Is their day structured in a way that they can take little decisions, do things wrong, but they don't die. They recover. You just have to fix a glass or something.
And do you feel what has made you successful is going to be the same skills that will make your kids successful? Or do you feel that AI is changing enough of the game?
I think, my biography is not super linear. So I stepped into the tech world, I would say, sort of after, a few years. It wasn't super evident to me, but I always felt very comfortable. I think in German, you would call it Urvertrauen. I don't know, that should be another word that people use, like Zeitgeist or something like that. And I always felt this deep trust in life, like things would turn out well. And ultimately felt I could rely on that I would figure things out, or things would figure themselves out, kind of thing. That sounds very naive now, but I think that gives me enough confidence to do new things, basically. So, I'm going to go work for a company, in a highly technical field in Palo Alto, but I'm sure I can do this. I will develop the skills to go there. I'm going to start my own company. Never done that. I haven't even written a business plan. I will figure it out, And that has allowed me to do that. And I feel that's almost a very old pedagogic concept of learning how to learn, or learning how to deal with ambiguity, that I hope, maybe this is more hope speaking, I hope will stay useful, but I have a feeling it will stay useful for quite some time.
And do you feel that's something that your kids are learning in school, or do you feel that's something that you definitely have to instill in them at home?
Yeah. To be honest, I think kind of this concept of completely outsourcing education to whatever facility, we should make sure the schools are optimal, and that teachers are well trained, and that schools are well equipped, and that, curricula are up to date and set up for children to learn these things. Definitely, and I kind of feel we have some way to go there. I feel like we're not there in the broader mass market. I think that's also a big issue, because people feel that, and they kind of feel very strongly about equipping their children well for the future. And I think that's not what's going on. Also, given the resources, right, that people have, and the overall setup, it's just becoming really hard for teachers to do that. A lot of children in Germany actually, I think 40% with migrant background, even German skills. And so it's just very complex. Even if you're trying to do the right thing, it's just very, very complex to accomplish. So something to do there, but I also feel like we can't completely outsource education to educational institutions. I think that's very naive. And I'm aware I'm a working mom, so I also need those facilities, and I'm relying on them also quite heavily, but I also think they don't replace me showing which values I have. And then, maybe my children find those values good and they want to pick them up. But I think that is something that parents still need to do. And if I don't think we can show up for our kids there. I think it's also okay. I think it's a privilege of parents to say, hey, those are my values, and that's, kind of how I'm going to run the show here. And then, children have to decide themselves way down the road if they agree with that or not. Yeah. I think we have some way to go, and also more resources and appreciation to show to this important sector of education, early childhood education. God.
I guess like historically, this whole system came about because of the Industrial Revolution, and the state then said, you know what, it's better for everyone if you go through this fairly standardized education system where we take care of it instead of the parents. Do you feel now there's again one of those shifts, and therefore it will be quite significantly impacting also things like education?
I
Or
mean, my
should it?
great hope is, to be honest, that it will be great for education because it basically has the potential to unify those two claims. So basically give the best education, right, that was formerly reserved to princes and royalty because they just had, a super uber genius as Mozart teaching you music or whatever. Democratization of education, right, for the masses. I think technology now has the potential to give a tool to marry those two concepts, to have more personalized education at a very high standard for everybody. And that doesn't mean we want to replace teachers, right? I think this, like, I don't know how you feel about this. When I think about pivotal moments in my life, I'm not sure if I could replace it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think of like people encouraging me in difficult moments to carry on or to have confidence or to summon up courage to do something. And those are usually teachers or my parents or other sort of figures of authority or mentors. And I think that's still something that's superhuman. That is connection, right? Relationship between people. But then which math exercise I do in which sequence? Yeah, maybe AI can be a good recommender for that.
I definitely agree with you that a lot of my path, in a way, was inadvertently set by one teacher who suggested I should study in the UK, and then kind of the rest is history. I do wonder around if we do move to an AI-ish more world, right? A lot comes back to the values again. Maybe for maths and physics, you can teach that in a way that isn't a question around beliefs in such a strong sense. But if you get into history, geography, and all of the other stuff that's becoming more and more politicized, that then feels like, again, you need more of the stack to be aligned with your worldviews in order to make sure that the education is also aligned with your worldviews. And that seems to always been quite an important aspect of politics.
Yeah, and let's put it this way. I think, though, that's also an important function of education to have that discourse room. Because in the end, I mean, a lot of the AI systems are also built to please us, right? To be like, oh, sorry, I was wrong. You're right. Here. Or here's the thing that you will like better. Look, let me make the image a bit pinker so you will really love it. That's not how real life is. There's friction, there's resistance. Like, are you always 100% on the same page with your life partner? Probably not. And that's also part of it. You don't want an ever-pleasing blob of, opinionless, whatever thing that's just kind of like, and nobody wants to be in a relationship with such a person, right? So such a thing. So I think that's also part of making sure that kids still learn that. Also, not everything goes your way.
Yeah, I also think actually friction is important for learning, right? Not
Yes.
just because you need to make mistakes, but sometimes you have to just work at stuff for a little bit. I think kind of there's even some research that writing by hand is better than typing because of the physical movement attached to it, and it takes a bit more effort, and therefore it's more memorable in your mind because you're more focused on one thing. And when parents find out what you do for a living, is there one question that they keep on asking you?
What should my kid study?
So that seems to be the question that everyone that I'm talking to gets asked by everyone. Do you have an answer to that one?
Whatever they love.
So it comes back to do something you're passionate about, so you will put in the effort.
Yeah. And I think creativity, right? I mean, if you look at different domains, I think you will see people are successful in all sorts of domains, right? That you never even thought of. Some of the professions I didn't even know existed, but you can be successful at everything. And I mean, the question is like, what are you optimizing for? Do you want to be happy? Do you want to be rich? Do you want to be successful or whatever? But I would say happiness is a bit hard to judge from the outside. But very successful people spend a lot of time on the things they do often, and loving it helps that, right? Because it's not a good day every day. So if you kind of buy into what you're doing, I think that probability is, yeah. And if you're not successful, at least you're doing something you love, right?
Yeah, it's like that all classic, do something you love and then you'll never work another day.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Nicole. That was a really interesting conversation. Just one last one before you go. If in 10 years' time, AI has enabled you to spend more time with your family, how did that come about?
We would have something like a AI family manager agent who would take care of all the like setting play dates, taking care of like shopping lists, all the admin cramps you have to do in life. I think that would be like a huge thing. And it probably, yeah, I think that would be good. I would like that. That's probably not so far away, actually.
Oh, that sounds like a co-pilot that you could probably build
Yeah,
fairly
let's
easily.
build it. Maybe I should just build it now.
Thank you so much, Nicole.
Take care. Thank you so much for the invitation. Bye, Gabriel.